Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. Episode 48, Mr. and Mrs Bushranger. William and Sarah Webb were believed to be the first recorded married couple who were bushrangers in Australia. William Webb, also known as Webbs, was born in 1797 in Stroud, Gloucestershire, England. On the 24th of June 1819, he was a prisoner at Tewkesbury Borough Jail on suspicion of being a deserter from the regiment. He was a trade labourer and in the July was sent to Plymouth to join his regiment. He was again convicted on the 23rd of December 1819 and his occupation was listed as a trade cloth draper. He was tried in court for the third time in the Chatham Court at the age of 28. His occupation was a clothier. This time he was sentenced to 14 years transportation, no doubt due to his prior convictions. He departed England on the 29th of March 1820 and arrived in New South Wales on the Mangles on the 7th of August 1820. From the 17th of October to the 13th of November 1823, he was a servant to Mr Rumka. From November 1823, he was listed on assignment to William Howe of Minto. He absconded from his assignment on the 22nd of April 1824 through to the 24th of June 1824 from William Howe. And in an article where there was a court hearing and he was one of the witnesses, William stated that he absconded again from the service of Mr Howe on the 11th of September 1824 and absconded to the cow pastures for 1 month. His description was, at the time 27, from Gloucestershire, 5 foot 7 inches, hazel eyes, sandy hair, pale complexion, and servant to William Howe, Esquire. William was still listed under house service in 1825 when he applied for permission to marry Sarah Brown, another convict. On the 11th of March 1825, he was granted permission to marry Sarah at Parramatta by Reverend Samuel Marsden. Sarah Brown was born in 1798 in Ireland. She was convicted at the Surrey Quarter Sessions and received 7 years transportation on the 9th of January 1821. Sarah was 23 at the time of her conviction. It stated that she was from Dumfries, Scotland, a needlewoman, 4 foot 11, fair complexion, brown hair and grey eyes. She came out on the ship Providence, leaving England on the 6th of June 1821 and arrived on the 8th of January 1822. In 1822, she was recorded in the General Muster as being assigned to the General Hospital in Sydney. On the 13th of September 1822, the Principal Superintendent's Office in Sydney stated that the undermentioned prisoners have absented themselves from their respective employments and some of them are at large with false certificates. All constables and others are hereby required to use their utmost exertion in lodging them into safe custody. Sarah was on that list, and it mentions, in addition to the earlier description, that she had a fair ruddy complexion and was pockmarked, and she had absconded from the General Hospital. There were still advertisements on the 22nd of November 1822, so nearly 2 months later, where she had remained at large. On the 19th of June 1823, it was advertised again that she has absconded, this time from the female factory at Parramatta, and she was still absconding on the 1st of October in 1823. In her jail record, she was recorded as absenting frequently from the female factory, and due to her escape from the House of Correction was sentenced as a runaway by the bench of magistrates, and she was placed in Sydney Jail. She was then sentenced to Port Macquarie on the 1st of October 1823. She did her time at Port Macquarie, and the next time there is a record, Sarah absconded from the service of Mr Thomas Small of Kissing Point on the 13th of December 1824, and she stated that she had absconded until the 4th of January 1825. And the information received on William and Sarah's absconding, and quite likely where they met, was recorded in the Australian on the 12th of May 1825 in the criminal court. 4 men were capitally indicted for feloniously killing 3 steers with the intent of stealing carcasses thereof. The cattle was said to be the property of Captain MacArthur. And it said the prisoners were employed under Mr John Wild's direction, who was superintendent of Lowes Hill Stockyard, situated at the cow pastures, and it belonged to the government. It says that they were in an outstation distant about 4 miles from Cawdor, and William Webb was listed as an accomplice in the case, and he was sworn and deposed that he is a prisoner. He was an assigned servant to Mr Howe, and on the 11th of September 1824, he absconded from his master and went to the cow pastures, where he became acquainted with the prisoners and resided with them in the government hut at that place for a space of 1 month, during which time he saw the whole of the prisoners go into the stockyard and kill 3 head of cattle. The Chief Justice asked him, "Have you had any promises or threats held out that have induced you to give this evidence?" And he said, "I have not." Sarah Brown was examined. "I am a prisoner and was an assigned servant to Mr Thomas Small of Kissing Point, from whom I absconded and went to the cow pastures on the 13th of December last and remained there until the 4th of January. Saw the prisoners at the bar at a government station at that place. I was invited by Murphy to go into the hut, at which place I remained several days. The last witness was living in the hut with them. The witness remained in a room detached from the other men with the prisoner Murphy. I observed on one occasion the prisoner's drive a herd of cattle into the stockyard, and shortly afterwards the prisoner Bridgens came into the hut bringing with him a piece of beef. I did not see any beast killed." Thomas Smith examined. "I'm a constable at Parramatta. I received instructions from the bench of magistrates to go, in company with the witness Webb, who had been apprehended as a bushranger and was then in custody, to the cow pastures for the purpose of being shown by him some skins of cattle which had been killed. Upon going to the spot which he had previously described to me as being the place where the skins were deposited, we could find none, but making a thorough search, we found 3 heads, which by their appearance I judged to have been cattle recently killed. I then cut off a piece of skin from each head and returned them to Parramatta. The skins were produced in court." Thomas Murphy, one of the men indicted, said that they were wild cattle and they'd run into the yards with the breeding herd. With respect to the 3 steers spoken of by Webb as being slaughtered in the month of December, they were wild cattle, the skins of which were, when taken off, were hung on the fence. So a verdict came in as not guilty. And in the small print at the bottom it said the 3rd count therefore rested on Webb's testimony. He had sworn to the prisoners having not merely killed cattle but tamed steers. He could swear to them being steers because he was not above 30 yards off at the time. White contradicted Webb, but he himself was implicated. Sarah Brown, though not implicated, contradicted White and supported Webb in certain particulars, while she contradicted him in none. But although Webb was a competent witness, the question for the consideration of the jury was, how far was he credible? So interesting that Webb was linked as being a bushranger at that time, and that was just before him and Sarah had married. So getting back to Sarah, on the 8th of February 1826, she was recorded as being absent from the female factory and was ordered to return there on the 10th of February. On the Saturday, the 18th of February 1826, there was an attempt by them to bring her back in custody. However, there was an article in the paper that said, absconded from the constable in charge while conveying them to the factory at Parramatta, the undermentioned women, Mary Ann Williams, per ship Brothers, assigned servant to Mr Forbes, and Sarah Brown, per ship Providence, better known by the name of Sailor Jack. Whoever lodges the above in safe custody shall receive a reward of $4 for each, applied to Thomas Hinton, Constable. On the 15th of April 1826 in the Australian, it was reported that William Webb per ship Mangles and Sarah Webb per ship Providence were charged with entering the dwelling house of Mr James Foster and stealing there from sundry articles the property of Robert Cottrell and his wife. It appeared that the woman Webb was dressed in man's apparel and pointed a musket into the house where Rebecca Cottrell was alone, placing Mrs Cottrell in bodily fear. Through the vigilance of Mr Bowman and two of the Aborigines of this colony, they were traced through very difficult and rocky country and were apprehended with the property that they had stolen from the farm of Mr Foster in their possession. Both were fully committed to take their trial on a capital charge before the Supreme Criminal Court at Sydney. In the court, it was stated that William had said that they'd visited a fortnight earlier to ask provisions from the farm. William took full blame and said that his wife was under his control. They were both found guilty. Both William and Sarah received the Crown Mercy, and William was transported to Norfolk Island for life. On the 11th of June 1826, Sarah was recorded in the jail description and entrance books for various robberies, and she was sent to the female factory at Parramatta again. The particulars in the trial, when it went to trial on the 13th of July 1826, the Sydney Gazette reported on it from the Supreme Criminal Court. William Webb and Sarah Webb, his wife, were capitally indicted for a robbery in the home of Robert Cottrell and therein putting in bodily fear Rebecca Cottrell at Argyle on the 26th of March. Rebecca Cottrell deposed that she was wife to one Robert Cottrell living at Argyle, that on the 25th of March, the two prisoners, whom she knew, they having been at her house about a fortnight before, the female prisoner on this occasion being dressed in men's clothing, during the absence of her husband from home, and asked for some provisions, which she gave them, and they went away. Shortly after they returned, and the man asked her if she did not say she knew them. Witness replied that she did not, when he said, "You did say so," adding that if she had not said she knew them, they would not have taken anything but the provisions. He then proceeded to rifle the house of a considerable quantity of wearing apparel and other property, which he handed through the window to the woman, who stood outside with a musket in her hand and who frequently threatened the witness, telling her to be still. Mr William Bowman deposed that he's a settler residing at Argyle, and on the 25th of March he was returning from the interior and passing by Cottrell's residence together with his servant. A man came out of the house saying that they had been robbed by two bushrangers, one of whom was a woman dressed in man's clothes, and requesting that he would render some assistance in seeking to apprehend them, as they had not long gone. The witness asked why they had not applied for assistance when his cart, conducted by some natives, had passed some time before. The man said they had done so, but the natives would not stop. The witness sent his servant after the cart, and having obtained two of the natives, they traced the prisoners by their footsteps for nearly 3 miles, and after fording a stream, discovered them at a glen on the other side, concealed amongst high reeds. They had a musket with them and a quantity of property, which was identified by Cottrell. The male prisoner did not deny having committed the robbery and observed that only Mrs Cottrell said she knew them. They would not have taken anything but the provisions, but as she did, he thought he may as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb. The prisoners being called upon for their defence, the man stated that his wife acted entirely under his control and begged the court on that account to extend mercy to her. The female prisoner pleaded that she was obliged to act as she had done by her husband. On September the 27th, 1826, His Honour addressed the prisoners on the heinousness of the crime of which they had been convicted, and sentence of death was passed upon the prisoners, at hearing which the unfortunate woman, who did not seem to anticipate such a result, dropped upon the floor and was carried shrieking out of court, and for some time after her removal, her cries resounded throughout the building. William was sent to the hulk and was recorded as free at the time of his sentence. Sarah was recorded as already being a prisoner and was sent back to the female factory at Parramatta to be held. On the 20th of February 1827, a government notice from the Colonial Secretary's office, £100 reward, whereas 5 convicted felons whose names are undermentioned effected their escape from the hulk Phoenix at an early hour in the morning of Monday last. Notice is hereby given that a reward of £20 will be paid for the apprehension of each of the said felons, who shall be safely lodged in one of His Majesty's jails. William Webb, per Mangles, 1820, cloth dresser, a native of Gloucestershire, 30 years of age, 5'7", fair pale complexion, brown hair and hazel eyes. On the 27th of March 1827, it was reported in the Sydney Gazette, so about 5 weeks later, William Webb, one of the 5 pirates who effected his escape from the Phoenix Hulk, was taken prisoner on Saturday last in the neighbourhood of Parramatta. He imposed himself on Mr Lacey as a Liverpool constable on dispatch to Parramatta. He had in his possession 2 pistols, 3 ball cartridges, a watch and £136, the most of it sterling in notes and silver. He told Dr Harris he had nothing to say at present, but perhaps he might by and by. Meanwhile, on the 25th of April 1827, the Principal Superintendents of Convicts Office, the undermentioned prisoners have absented themselves from their respective employments. Sarah Webb is listed, Providence, needlewoman, 29, Dumfries, 4'11", grey eyes, brown hair, fair pock-pitted complexion, absconded from the female factory Parramatta. And on the 4th of May 1827, the Supreme Court resumed its sittings. William Webb was indicted for a robbery in the dwelling house of Timothy Beard at Cairns Hill in the district of Cabramatta, putting the inmates in bodily fear and stealing thereout £220 in money, some wearing apparel, a silver watch and a pistol on the 14th of March. Timothy Beard stated that he resided at the sign of the Bay Horse at the bottom of Cairns Hill and keeps a public house, that about 8 o'clock on the 14th of March, 9 men, of whom the prisoner was one, all armed, got over the palings and rushed into the house. The witness's wife and some 3 or 4 persons who were in the house were forced into a small room, at the door of which one of the parties stood with a pistol and cutlass to prevent their egress. The prisoner and another man then went into the bedroom, which they plundered of every article they could lay their hands on. They also demanded money, observing that it was the first robbery they had committed since getting away from the Hulk. It would have to be either money or life. The witness's wife denied having any money in the house, and they then proceeded to break open the boxes with a spade and carried off £220 in various kinds of money. They remained in the house altogether about an hour and a half. Witness is positive that the prisoner was one of the party, having seen him at his house before. Immediately when he heard the prisoner was apprehended, the witness went to Parramatta, thinking to recover part of his money, and on being produced for him to identify by order of Dr Harris, witness, recognised a jacket and trousers on his person, which had been carried off on the night of the robbery. There were upwards of £160 found on the prisoner when he was apprehended. The jury returned a verdict of guilty and he was remanded. And on the 11th of May 1827, it was reported in the Australian at the Supreme Court, William Webb was brought up to receive sentence. He's a middle-aged man. He was convicted on the 2nd of May last of a robbery in the dwelling house of Timothy Beard, publican, and putting the persons in bodily fear. The prisoner pleaded guilty to the indictment at the time of the trial, and persisting in this plea, that verdict was recorded. The court, in passing sentence upon the prisoner, said it would be highly improper to hold out the slightest hope that mercy would be extended to him, and warned this unhappy offender that he be prepared to meet his fate, which inevitably awaited him. Sentence of death was then passed on to the prisoner in the usual manner. And a fortnight later, reported on the 23rd of May 1827 in the Australian, titled Execution. William Webb suffered death at the usual place of execution in Parramatta on the 21st of May. It details the particulars. Webb spoke to one witness that deposed against him, having sworn falsely. Power and Webb held a handkerchief between the hem. They shook hands together with the hangman, and as they exclaimed, "Lord Jesus, deliver us," the drop was let fall, and a few moments after put a period to their sufferings. Webb was an elderly man. He was married and a parent. Round his neck was attached a locket containing a portion of his wife's hair. And much to my frustration, I cannot find a record of a child or children born to William Webb and Sarah Brown. There was a police report on the 4th of May 1828 in the Sydney Gazette
Sarah Webb, alias Brown, and James Siddons were brought before the bench on the 2nd of January, the former for being a runaway and the latter for being found drunk in her company. It appeared in evidence that Sarah was an old offender and well conversant in the wicked ways of the world, for she had been sentenced with her husband to be executed for stealing in a dwelling house and putting the inmates in bodily fear. The sentence or the law was put in force against Sarah's husband, while she was respited but sentenced to hard labour in the female factory. The conduct of this female was of the most hardened description, as she declared she would adopt any scheme to effect her escape. She had been in the bush about 5 months and occasionally committed depredations in male attire. She was sentenced to 3 years in 3rd class in the factory and to have her head shaved. And the last record I find of Sarah is on the 29th of October 1828 in the census, Parramatta, in the government female factory. Sarah Brown or Webb, age 30, Catholic. And unfortunately, this is where the trial goes cold on Sarah. So, well, definitely not a happy ending for William Webb, and quite possibly also not a happy ending for Sarah Webb, considering that the records go cold at that point.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.